Hello, Annie, and tell us a bit about yourself, please.
Yes, I'm Annie Theibert, a project manager for Salesforce, which is a global technology company. I've been in the business for over a decade, where I will help lead teams implement software for um, different organizations, and it's something I definitely very much enjoy doing. When I'm not on the job, I like to dream up my own projects, whether it be for plans for my garden or event planning, kind of planning trips, things of that nature. I just can't help myself.
Mm-hmm.
And then, in addition to that, of course, working with Venture to Impact, I've been very fortunate to have volunteered with the organization multiple times, and definitely happy to be here again to speak with you.
Thank you, Annie. We are happy to have you here as well. I think my first question regarding project management is that why did you choose project management as a profession?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It wasn't something I studied in college. It's definitely something that has evolved over time. I feel like with most people's professional careers, but it's what I really enjoy about project management is the sense of accomplishment when you complete something successfully, and then also I am definitely someone who likes a lot of variety in what I do, and uh, project management definitely affords that. I work with a lot of different types of people, different initiatives, things of that nature. And it's also something where, project management's work in all types of verticals. So, although I'm in technology now, I used to work in retail and e-commerce, and it's something that's pretty fluid. It can you can do project management within a lot of industries.
That's awesome. And now that you mentioned that you can do project management in a lot of industries, now I have another question for you. And why? Why does project management even exist? And does is it necessary? Maybe a lot of people ask like why we need a person to kind of project manage us. So
Yeah,
yeah.
that's a very good question as well. The purpose of project management is to plan and manage a project to successfully complete, meeting its goals and deliverables. And it involves, identifying, managing risk, careful resource management. You have to, have clear communications across multiple teams. Budgeting is very critical, and all of these components wrapped up together. It's nice to have a project manager be accountable for that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because like professionally implementing, software for me requires a significant amount of collaboration. And you're working with a lot of folks with different areas of expertise, for example,
Mm-hmm.
developers or analysts, folks in marketing, designers, and they all have, very important skill sets. And so you don't want the designers having to worry about if things are on budget, or you don't want your developer to have to stress about, communicating the timeline of a project. That's, you leave that to the project manager to do. And so it's definitely um, a role that sort of helps bind everything together, and
Correct.
just kind of makes everyone else's life easier.
Exactly. One of the things that I found is like people that are awesome and great in their job, they would like to take their time to deliver the best possible, deliverables to the team. Project managers kind of bring them back to reality, and it's like, yes, perfection is awesome, but we also have a deadline, so that
Yep.
also helps. Having a project manager on top. So if we want to introduce project management as in a general frame, you know, doesn't matter what kind of industry, just project
Hmm.
management as a basic big umbrella. Would you be able to kind of like introduce project management basics to us?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I do have one slide I'm going to share. as I kind of talk through it. I won't go into too much detail, but I do think it's valuable. Let me know when you see my screen.
I can see your screen, yes.
All right,
Beautiful.
perfect. So, for project management, the Project Management Institute is an organization that kind of sets the standards of global project management, if you will. And they define project management as the application of knowledge, skills, tools, techniques to project activities to meet the project requirements. And the definition of a project is an individual or collaborative enterprise that's carefully planned and designed to achieve a particular aim. So essentially, we are identifying goals and executing on them. And we kind of break this out by and large in these 4 phases that you see on the screen. So identify, initiate, that's where we're all kind of coming together someone's got an idea that we want to execute on. Who do we need to involve, kind of bringing people together. And then moving into the planning phase, this is a big one, especially for the project manager, kind of, designing what the budget looks like. How are we going to bring this to life, get everybody's buy-in, things like that. And then from there, we move into execute. So execute's where the work's getting done, essentially, or we're kind of building on what we're hoping to achieve. That's definitely where you spend a lot of your time. I'd say planning and executing are going to be the majority of your time. And then, you move into close. This is where everyone agrees that what we've delivered on is what we were looking for, things like that. Or in some cases, closing can be just ending a project where we decided to not complete the specific initiative. So it can do a variety of things. But when you kind of look at this, it's important to note that all projects are different, and you're going to have to do different types of analysis or communication depending on the size of your project and the types of people you're working with. So, but with that in mind, I do think that these phases can work generally for whatever type of project you're looking to achieve. And then something that's not listed here, but it is, as a project manager, critical to keep top of mind is what we call monitor and control. So this is kind of the idea of making sure everything's always on track. And it's not listed here because it's basically happens throughout the entire project.
Right.
So
that's correct. Yeah.
So that's kind of a brief overview with respect to how project management runs.
It's exactly, I'm familiar with all of these stages as well. I've worked in multiple industries, and I have been a project manager in multiple industries. And this is absolutely the framework that every industry is following. The wording could be different, naming could be different, but the framework and structure is always the same. And obviously monitoring and evaluation is in every part of the project very strongly from day one of initiation until closure. It's always monitoring every track in every work in every person, and at the end or even mid project there are evaluation phases that projects go through. So thank you very much. This was a great way of putting project management basics in. So now I want to talk about a little bit about leadership and project management. So although in a lot of cases the project manager is not the boss or the supervisor, project manager needs to have leadership skills. Absolutely, it's necessary. So now I'm going to ask you, Annie, what is your leadership style?
I think by and large, kind of when they have the different categories of it, I would identify with being a democratic or participative
Correct.
leadership
Mm-hmm.
kind of style. So what that means is really, my job as project manager is to encourage the team members to actively participate in the decision-making processes. A lot of the authority is delegated to the team.
Mm-hmm.
They play the active role in managing that project. So kind of being a cheerleader, if you will, or if they need assistance, I'm there to help, clear those blockers. I feel very fortunate that I work with, groups of really smart people who are very motivated, and it's generally pretty fluid.
Right,
um,
right.
but there are other cases where I see it more of kind of a directing leadership in the sense that if things are pretty darn clear cut, you know, just tell folks what they need to do, when, where, how to do it. And they're kind of off and running.
Mm-hmm.
And I try to tailor it to the types of teams that I'm working with, but generally that's how I'm able to be successful in my role.
Gotcha. So I think the key that you mentioned is like being flexible and creative based on the team you're working with is the key. And I agree with you. That's very important. So when working with your team, for sure communication is one of the most important part. And want to know what is your communication style? How do you keep the communication going and make sure you always are connected with your team?
Hmm. Yeah, that's interesting because it can vary quite a bit. I know kind of in this day and age with people working globally, teams maybe dispersed in various locations. So it can vary quite a bit, but I think for my style and the teams that I'm working with right now, I do think it's important to have regular check-ins, whether it's you're meeting 15 minutes every morning to review what folks are working on. And the purpose of those stand-up calls are literally just that. Like, what are
Mm-hmm.
we working on today? Are there, anything that needs to be addressed? If something needs to be addressed, you write that down, take it offline, discuss it, at length um,
Mm-hmm.
later in the day. And then also, I mean, I have to do a lot of communicating through different platforms.
Right.
So not email, right? Our inboxes get flooded.
Oh,
I know mine does. So if you're able to find, certain um, software solutions that allow you to just provide communications on projects, I feel like that reduces a lot of clutter, and it also helps streamline um, the information that you're looking for. So that's as far as how often I do it and kind of the tools that I use. I think another thing that's really important with communication, when you're checking in with folks or when you're communicating to the stakeholders, is to ask a lot of questions. You definitely always want to be curious, and I've even found that it's important to ask questions that you already know the answers to, because a lot of information can be uncovered from hearing someone else respond.
okay.
Um,
That's interesting.
yeah. Mhm.
Okay. Perfect. Um, could you explain a little bit more about that? Like, it's very interesting, so I need to know a little bit more. So, you mentioned that you ask questions that you already know the answers of. How and why?
Yeah, so this, I do this. It's a great way to make sure we're all still on the same page, things
Right.
aren't getting off track, kind of thing. So, when I'm, for example, checking in with the customer, my stakeholders as far as what we're delivering on. So, we've already agreed to the solution that we're providing, but I'll ask them again, you know, what is the end result that we're looking for
Mm-hmm.
here? And that's to make sure that like we all have the same expectations of what we're trying to
It's
achieve.
very important.
And then another, example could be, checking in with the team. And I mean, you know the timeline, but the and it's kind of, perhaps listed somewhere. You've got it jotted down, due dates and such, but asking team members, again, when are you going to deliver this by, can unearth um, other insights like, oh, my team member might say, I've actually got two other things that popped up, so this is going to push something out. And if you don't ask those questions, you're not going to get some answers.
That's
So
great.
that's
Yeah.
kind of why I do that as a practice.
That's very interesting. Thank you. And so now that you mentioned that, I want to ask you about your difficult days, because this is, when you look at a project, it's
Mm-hmm.
not always ideal how it's going and where it's going. And a project manager, hard task is to put everybody and everything back on track.
Mm-hmm.
When do you know when project is off track?
Yeah.
It is
That's
a
a good one.
good
That's
question. This is
yeah.
our lives.
Yep, exactly. Absolutely. I would say when you get the sense of things being off track, kind of to the question that we were just kind of discussing about asking those questions and you're getting answers that you don't expect.
Right.
That's definitely one.
Those big
Um,
pauses and it's like, oh yeah, okay.
yeah. Okay. Wait. Okay. Let's take a step back. I
I
think
know.
that's a pretty popular phrase. So, but it's misaligned expectations obviously being a big one, so that's why it's important, with the communication, always kind of making sure we're marching towards the same goal. um,
Right.
and then the other big one, scope creep. So um, you've got a plan in place, and then someone's like, oh, but one more thing, or two more things, or can we also do this, and sort of as you're going to make concessions within a project. Like some things that make sense that you kind of go through the process, evaluate, and you're like, okay, this can be added. Other times, um, you have to push back. So when things start to get off track, I find it's usually due to scope creep and misaligned expectations. Other things to be aware of, obviously, monitoring budget, and then also managing to your team's capacity, like how available are they to focus on certain tasks at certain times.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yes. I am familiar with all of that. And okay, in the scenario that the project is not adhering to the schedule, how you pull it back, you kind of answered that, in the previous one, but I just want to specifically know what's your style of bringing back the project, on track before it's, all over the place. And, for sure it's going to be more difficult to do so when it's completely off track.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, I typically want to make sure that I can regroup as quickly as possible,
Certainly, yeah.
to align on the goals of the project. Again, I feel like that's, everybody needs to get together so that everyone's kind of marching towards the same goal again, if you will. And then from there, it's um, really important to start over communicating. And it's, when I say over communicating, I mean, you want to be thoughtful about it. You don't want to do it to the point where ad nauseum, where people aren't paying attention to what you're saying anymore. But having, clear documentation, with identified deadlines that we're all on top of, is generally the best way,
Right.
to get something um, back in line. Um, it, and I feel that that's my number one way of doing something. I mean, a lot of times people, if something's getting off track, they want to bring in more resources. And I think that's sort of a slippery slope, because that can actually make things even more difficult to
Right.
get back on track. But yeah, I just, communicating, more frequent check-ins, and then sort of when we're talking again about the deliverables, evaluating timelines, maybe you kind of need to restructure what the goals are. Maybe you were biting off more than you could chew.
Correct.
and didn't realize it until halfway through.
Right, right. Thank you. Speaking of bringing back on track of a project, how do you handle working with difficult team members? There could be, many reasons why we call a team member difficult, but in general, when one of your team members are not working to their full capacity, or just are not following your directions because of many, many reasons. How do you handle that?
Yeah. I think what an important way to first address it is with that individual directly. So just kind of having that one-on-one kind of conversation, and the way I sort of would structure it is, let's talk about what your workload is. What all have you got going on? Because there could just be, underlying reasons why, my particular project isn't being addressed, but I'm unaware that they've got 10 other things that they are focused on. So kind of getting that broader picture from them. And then figuring out how I can help her or him deal with the obstacles that they're facing. And that's sort of my first line of just, and a lot of times that I can say that resolves the
Yeah,
majority of issues.
right.
Just kind of having
Understanding
that
and
conversation.
discovery. Yeah, yeah, gotcha.
For sure, and developing that relationship. But if, in the case that it's something that continues to happen, you're just not seeing the progress that you would hope for. You have to do more hand holding, quite frankly. So breaking down their tasks in smaller phases, a lot more documentation. Kind of these are the mini goals. Are you hitting them? If you're not, document why that's the case, and that's important. I think obviously for them to see, and I think it helps build accountability for these team members. But then also, in the case where you need to replace that team member, you need someone else on the project. That's sort of your paper trail to, I don't know, your manager, their manager, as to why this team member isn't the best fit for what they're working on right now, or
Right,
that's how I approach it. Yeah.
right. So just wanted to add that if somebody asked me what would be the most difficult part of my job, I would say people management. It's sensitive, it's difficult, and it needs a lot of energy and understanding and discovery.
Yeah.
And I am, we always learn, and there's no point in my time that I can say I know how to handle people. I
Right.
think we will,
Absolutely.
yeah, I will never get there, and it's always ways to improve. And also, we have a lot of difficult clients as well. And, I want to, like, if you could briefly touch on how you handle, because you cannot talk to a client manager and say, I don't want them on my team. That is
Right.
kind of like off the option. So how do you handle like a difficult client, very demanding client? Because every client thinks their project is the most important one. And, we say a customer is always right. So how do you manage that? How do you handle a difficult client?
Yeah, it when possible, getting ahead of it. So if you're assigned to a new projects, setting expectations. I kind of keep coming back to this early and often, and making sure you have everyone's buy-in, your written approval. This is what we're working on. That will always kind of be your kind of rock to center things. Now, if it's a case where the customer is asking for more and more, it could be that the customer doesn't realize that they're a difficult person to work with. So kind of having those conversations with them so that they understand the processes that need to be followed within a project. Sometimes as simple as that to address. They don't know what they don't know. So it's constant education
Right.
um, the whole way through.
Right.
And it is something where I feel that over the years, I mean, you have to develop a thick skin being a project manager. There's no two ways about it. I mean,
Right.
part of your job is sometimes, communicating bad news, and taking the feedback from your customers with regards to
Correct.
that. So, you want to protect your team. So, that's from the client side. I would just say, that communication, and always bringing up like this is what we agreed to is your best bet.
Correct.
And then the other part of managing difficult clients is kind of helping the team out. Like you want to keep your team motivated. I mean, if you're dealing with challenging personalities, and that's tough for your project team to take. So it's as a project, it's your job to keep the team moving and happy and feeling satisfied with what they're doing. So you're kind of playing both sides.
So true. Yeah. Exactly. Thank you so much. Now I want to come out of the technical kind of like aspects of project management and go to more like some subjects that are more I can relate with in the pandemic situations that we are in right now. First, in my experience, I have a lot of scenarios when I work with remote teams and team members. So I'm familiar with that. I think all the project management really are, kind of like handling both in office and remote team members. How do you manage remote teams?
Yeah, so I have been fortunate in that I've worked remotely for at least 6 years now.
Okay,
So,
wow. Okay,
yeah,
so you are an expert.
yeah, I don't know if it's just because I've done it for so long that it becomes easier.
Yeah,
At any rate, but I totally hear you when folks in different time zones, that can be challenging. So it's really important to know your team's work schedules and availability. I can't say it enough. Like, for my teams, having their calendars up to date is critical, so that I know when I'm able to reach out to them.
very
Having
important.
designated, yes, absolutely. It could be, I think the daily stand-ups, depending on the type of project you're doing, and then also, holding in office hours so that folks know, okay, this is when she's available. She's not going to be in a meeting. I think can also be helpful. And it's great having the different types of technology to check in with folks. So I mean, I use instant messenger regularly.
Yeah,
And I use that for quick questions. If it's kind of a meatier topic,
you avoid that. Yeah,
you try to avoid that, because then that just gets too confusing. But you can
yep.
bring up a quick, like, I reserve that for quick questions or quick confirmations type of thing. And then, I think it's important to have good project management applications, where you can streamline those communications, and things can flow, accordingly, regardless of where you're located. So yeah,
Like some softwares, right, that you prefer to use.
absolutely.
Could
Yeah.
could you name a few that are your favorites?
Yeah, so I am actually pretty flexible with them. I think having worked with so many different customers, I've been exposed to all kinds of them. But
Sure.
the one that I tend to use most often, I think from specifically a project manager perspective, Smart Sheets is a really good one for developing.
Right.
It's easy to learn. You can share it online. Things are, real time. But then I also use a custom instance of Salesforce, that is also great for posting, all updates for projects. But you can make if the Google Office documents work, because again, they're always available online to folks. I know Trello is something that you use, which I've heard great things about. I personally have not had exposure to it, but there's Slack.
Right.
There's a lot of them out
There's a
there.
lot. Yeah, exactly. There's a lot out there, and it's just knowing the principles and basics of these softwares and project management help you to facilitate any of them to your needs. So in this day and age, software, accessibility is not an issue as much as it was before. So that's great.
Right.
Now, let's just talk about the specific situation we're in, and that's the pandemic, and quarantine and work from distance, work from home. How have you been performing your specific tasks that you usually perform in office? Now in the pandemic with your team.
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing that the pandemic has changed for the teams that I work with is not having kind of your professional space. Like your personal life is now your professional life, and it's where striking that balance, I think, has been
Right.
very challenging, especially for families. When you
Right.
have kids at home, or if you're in a kind of a limited space capacity. So what that means is you have to be flexible, and if that means changing your schedule, and really developing a routine, which might not be your standard, 9 to 5 in the office, but maybe it becomes a 10 to 3, and then you take a break for family, or just getting out of the house for a
Or
bit and then coming
homeschooling.
back online. Exactly. Yeah. So I think it's really being flexible, yet also finding routine that works well.
Fantastic. Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Last couple of questions, Annie. And, as a project manager, operations person, I have been through a lot of stress. And, never, we were not born with the ability to project manage. So it comes naturally. How do you handle stress, and how do you, as a senior person, actually, I would love to know how have you grown to handle it better over the years?
Yeah.
I know it's always
Yeah.
there, so I just wanted to
It's
be
always
cautious
gonna be
about
there.
how I'm saying this. Like how, yeah.
Yep. I something that's worked really well for me is that perhaps you get that one communication that says, "Oh, we're not going to be able to deliver on Friday like we said we would to the customer," and I have to process that, and I literally will take just deep breaths. You can do the counting exercise. Something that simple works wonders.
Right.
Or if you just step away from your desk for a few minutes, that I feel like kind of helps with the vast majority of situations. I think it's also really nice if you're able to do this, have a sounding board. So if you're really upset about that, if you have that kind of colleague or confidant that you can speak to, like, "Oh my gosh, this is, let me tell you just what happened and why I'm super upset about it," and have that person kind of process that for you. And I feel like just having someone listen or be able to give their advice back to you, like another project manager, like working through that together,
Right.
really makes things a lot easier to take.
Correct.
Yeah. And I think it's also important to know that, yes, project management can definitely be stressful, but stress isn't always a bad thing. I mean, they talk about how there's good stress and there's bad stress, and good stress can really keep you motivated, and can be kind of exciting at times. So I
Right.
don't know if that's another way of kind of looking at it when it does pop up.
Right, right. There is a fine line between passion and stress for me. Like when I'm getting so passionate about something, I feel the excitement, but what people see in the outside is stress, and it's kind of like difficult for, like, I have been working on not showing the stress when it's absolutely passion and excitement, so the team members don't feel kind of like a bad stress over like just passion and excitement. So it's very delicate. It's really sensitive how
Absolutely.
you, yeah. And having that trusted person that you mentioned is absolutely, that is a saving matter in the profession and everything else. So
Yeah.
it's very important, which we are not really, taking advantage of in the pandemic situation. Because, in the normal days, like 2 cubicles away, it was that friend, trust person that you just walk over to that cubicle, start talking, and then come back. And unfortunately, in the pandemic, we don't have that. So breathing exercises or writing down or things like that would help, as you mentioned. That's great. And the last question I have for you is kind of like, I always have this in my personal thoughts of, if you retire tomorrow and you have the choice of picking anything to do, what would you want to do for your 9 to 5 schedule?
Yes, I've definitely thought about this a number of times, maybe on the more stressful days than others. So, I guess normally I would say, if it weren't for COVID-19,
Right.
I would happily retire and do a lot of traveling. I'd love to be able to go on more V2I trips.
Oh, yes.
Visit and see my family. I definitely am someone who enjoys being out and about, a lot more hiking and camping, things like that. But asking that question, if it were literally tomorrow,
Right.
and being in this pandemic, it would definitely be throwing myself into my gardening work and
Beautiful. Yeah.
probably home projects. Yeah.
Beautiful. Beautiful. That's awesome.
What about you?
Huh?
What
Sorry?
would you do?
Oh, well, I love crafts. I do a lot of crafting, and a pandemic or no pandemic, or retired or not, I have always, my go-to for any kind of like stress relief or me hobby has been crafting. So if I retire tomorrow, I would definitely go to the craft suppliers that are open. And I think I buy the whole shelves and just start my crafting more professionally. Well, thank you for asking, because it's always
course.
something that I think about all the time. So, Annie, this was a pleasure, and I personally learned a lot from this short conversation. And, I will definitely pass any questions that our partners might have about this kind of like interview to you to answer to them. And I appreciate your time, and I wish you the best of luck for your your pandemic situation, and the post-pandemic, and for your life. Thank you so much for this time.
Thanks, Ella. Appreciate it.